At 3 o'clock in the morning on February 2nd, 1502, a chilling cry echoed through the stone halls of Ferrara's Este castle. It was not the cry of fear nor of pain. It was something far more unsettling. Guards lowered their eyes, courtiers shifted nervously, and ambassadors exchanged knowing looks. Everyone understood that what they were hearing was not simple passion, but the most scandalous ritual of power in Renaissance Europe. On this night, the consummation of Lucrezia Borgia's marriage would be no private affair. It was a performance, an act repeated 3 times before dawn, each moment recorded, each sigh carrying the weight of dynasties. This was not about love, it was about survival, politics, and dominance. What unfolded in that chamber transformed a 22-year-old woman into the most dangerous weapon of diplomacy the Renaissance had ever seen. Brace yourself. It's a scandalous wedding night changed Italy forever. The year was 1502, a time when Italy was less a united land than a fragile chessboard of rival powers. Kingdoms rose and fell not only by war, but also by marriage, by alliances written in silk and sealed in candlelit chambers. And on the night of February 2nd, in the city of Ferrara, one such alliance would alter the balance of Renaissance Europe forever. Inside the Este castle, the courtyard slept under a blood-red moon. But behind guarded doors, all of Ferrara held its breath. For within the ducal chambers, the wedding of Lucrezia Borgia, daughter of Pope Alexander VI, was about to be consummated. This was no ordinary union. It was a calculated ritual, a performance where flesh became the battlefield and every sigh carried the weight of dynasties. At just 20 years old, Lucrezia was already infamous, twice married, twice marked by scandal. Her first husband was humiliated as impotent. Her second was strangled to death within Vatican walls. Her beauty was praised in poetry, her name whispered in fear. She entered Ferrara not as an innocent bride, but as a survivor, sharpened by betrayal. And now she stood at the threshold of her third marriage, where survival meant transforming her body into the sharpest weapon of diplomacy. Her new husband, Alonso d'Este, heir to Ferrara, was a different kind of man, a soldier, an engineer, and a Renaissance prince whose strength was forged not in gossip, but in cannon smoke and steel. Unlike the courtiers who lived on whispers, Alfonso embodied raw power. Yet tonight his virility and honor would be put to the ultimate test. For in Renaissance Italy, the consummation of a marriage was no private matter. It was politics made flesh. Witnesses, sometimes hidden in shadows, sometimes recording from behind curtains, were tasked with ensuring that passion had been fulfilled. The legitimacy of entire dynasties depended not just on words, but on proof, on the cries that echoed through the stone corridors. The chosen night was no coincidence. February 2nd was the feast of the purification of the Virgin, a holy day where sanctity and sexuality collided. By staging their consummation on this night, the Este and Borgia families bound the carnal with the divine, ensuring that this act was not only physical, but also sacred, sanctified politics disguised as intimacy. But what set this night apart, what turned it into a legend whispered across Europe, was not one act of consummation. It was 3 times before the break of dawn. The young bride and groom would enact their ritual under the watchful silence of hidden eyes. 3 acts that would echo far beyond the chamber walls, shaping treaties, alliances, and even wars. This was the scandalous Renaissance wedding night of Lucrezia Borgia, recorded, remembered, and weaponized for generations. To some, it was the ultimate humiliation. A woman's body reduced to spectacle, her intimacy transformed into politics. To others, it was the moment Lucrezia seized her destiny, proving she could turn vulnerability into power. As the first candle was lit and the velvet curtains fell across the bed like theater drapes, the stage was set. The marriage of the Pope's daughter and the Este was about to become the most infamous performance in Italy, a union where survival, desire, and power fused into a ritual. Repeated 3 times in one night, leaving behind whispers that still scandalize history. In Renaissance Italy, marriages were never simple unions of love. They were political treaties, agreements signed not with ink, but with bodies. Behind every wedding feast, behind every glittering ceremony, there was a contract written in flesh. To the powerful families of Italy, a bride was more than a wife. She was a bargaining chip, a vessel for heirs, and a symbol of alliance. And for the Boers, no one embodied this more dangerously than Lucrezia Borgia. Her father, Pope Alexander VI, had mastered the art of turning his children into weapons. His son, Cesare Borgia, carved territories through blood and conquest. But his daughter, Lucrezia, wielded a different kind of blade: beauty, charm, and strategic seduction. Twice before her marriages, she had been a pawn in her father's game, and twice before they had ended in scandal. Her first husband, Giovanni Forza, fled Rome, branded as impotent after whispers spread that the marriage had never been consummated. The humiliation was public, his honor destroyed, and the annulment sealed Lucrezia's reputation as a dangerous bride. Her second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, fared even worse. Strangled to death inside the Vatican itself, a victim of papal intrigue. Rumors swirled that Caesar himself ordered the murder. By the time Lucrezia prepared for her third marriage, she was no innocent maiden. She was a survivor of the Vatican's darkest games. The Este family of Ferrara knew this. They did not marry her for love. They married her because the Boers were power incarnate. By joining their house to the papal dynasty, the Estes secured not only political protection, but also immense wealth. Lucrezia's dowry was 100,000 gold ducats, a fortune so vast it could fund armies. Yet money alone was not enough. In the brutal politics of the Renaissance, wealth meant nothing without legitimacy. And legitimacy was proven only in one place: the marriage bed. This is what made Lucrezia's wedding night so perilous. 'Twas not a private affair. 'Twas a trial, a test, and a performance. Consummation was politics. Without it, the marriage could be annulled. Alliances broken, treaties dissolved. Enemies of the Boers waited eagerly for the slightest whisper of weakness. A single rumor that Alfonso had failed or that Lucrezia had not conceived could collapse the entire alliance. And so, to ensure survival, the ritual became extreme. Not once, not twice, but 3 times before dawn, the act had to be performed and recorded. Witnesses were placed in secret. Chancellors assigned to take notes. Behind the velvet curtains, intimacy became evidence. Desire became testimony. Every sigh, every cry, every whispered word was political proof. Lucrezia understood this better than anyone. Having suffered humiliation before, she knew that failure in bed meant failure in politics, and failure in politics could mean death. Her strategy was clear. She would transform what the world expected to be her weakness into her greatest weapon. By surviving the night, by proving herself 3 times, she would become untouchable. For Alfonso, too, the stakes were immense. Known as a soldier and builder of cannons, he was strong. But strength on the battlefield was meaningless if he faltered in the chamber. The fate of his dynasty rested on his ability to endure and perform under pressure. The Este family could not afford whispers of impotence. His body, too, became a weapon of politics. Thus, when the doors closed and the candles flickered, the stage was not set for romance. It was set for survival. This was no fairy tale. It was a contract, a ritual, a scandalous performance where power was measured not in crowns or armies, but in flesh and blood. As midnight deepened, the Este castle transformed into a silent theater. The corridors outside the ducal chambers were hushed, yet everyone knew what was about to unfold. The guards stood like statues. Courtiers whispered behind their hands, and foreign ambassadors listened for every echo. For on this night, the marriage bed was no longer private. It was a stage, a courtroom, and a battlefield. The ritual began with ceremony. Prints of crimson velvet were drawn. Candles flickered against tapestries of war and conquest, and the bed was prepared as if it were an altar. For the Este family and for the Boers, the consummation was not simply an intimate act. It was the sacred sealing of an alliance. The first consummation came swiftly. It was passionate, but not uncontrolled. Alfonso and Lucrezia understood that eyes and ears, though hidden, were upon them. The whispers that carried down the hall were not dismissed as gossip. They were evidence. To hear the Pope's daughter cry out was to confirm that the act had begun. For the estate chancellor stationed in secret, it was the first line of testimony, proof that the marriage had been fulfilled. But in the Renaissance, once was not enough. The danger of annulment haunted every noble family. Enemies would whisper that a single consummation might have been staged or that weakness had crept in afterward. To prevent doubt and to silence critics, the act was repeated. The second consummation took place in the stillness of the night. It was slower, more deliberate, less about passion, and more about performance. Every movement became part of the ritual. Every sound was a signal meant for the political record. To the outsiders waiting in corridors, it was a strange invasion. But to the court of Ferrara, it was duty. The bedroom had become an extension of the treaty hall. This second act confirmed that the union was not an illusion, but a reality. Yet even that was not enough. The Este family demanded complete assurance, and so came the third and final consummation, the one that would be remembered for centuries. By dawn, both bride and groom had proven themselves, not once, but 3 times. Alfonso's endurance was no longer in question. Lucrezia's reputation as a survivor of scandal had turned into something more dangerous. She was now a woman who could weaponize her body as proof of power. The symbolism of 3 carried weight. It was not just repetition, it was ritual. In Catholic tradition, 3 was the number of the sanctity of binding perfection. To consummate 3 times was to create a trinity of proof: carnal, political, and divine. What happened in that chamber was not mere intimacy. It was the creation of a dynasty. By the time dawn broke over Ferrara, the scandalous whispers had already begun to spread. Diplomats who had lingered in the castle corridors reported back to their masters. Scribal notes were locked into archives to be used as weapons should politics demand it. The marriage of Lucrezia Borgia and Alfonso d'Este was no longer just gossip. It was documented, irrefutable evidence that an alliance had been sealed in flesh. This was the night that transformed the bed into a battlefield, the bride into a weapon, and the act of love into a ritual of survival. 3 consummations, 1 night, and a scandal that would echo across Renaissance Europe. When dawn broke on February 3, 1502, Ferrara was no longer the same. The night's ritual had ended. The candles burned low, but the echoes of that scandalous consummation repeated. 3 times still lingered in the castle corridors. What had begun as an intimate performance between bride and groom had become a political earthquake, shaking the balance of Renaissance Italy. For Lucrezia Borgia, the transformation was immediate. Once branded as a pawn and dismissed as a daughter of corruption, she emerged from that chamber as a force. The consummation, documented, witnessed, and repeated 3 times, silenced her critics. No longer could rivals whisper of impotence, annulments, or weakness. She was now indispensable. Her survival was tied directly to the survival of the Este dynasty. Killing her or dishonoring her would mean destabilizing Ferrara itself. For the first time in her life, Lucrezia was untouchable. Alfonso d'Este too had passed his trial. His endurance had not only secured his marriage, but also his dynasty's future. Where other noble heirs had faltered, mocked by or broken reputations, Alfonso triumphed. His virility was no longer rumor. It was a fact sealed in the very records kept by the Este court. He had proven himself both as a warrior in battle and as a man of resilience in bed. From that moment forward, his claim to power in Ferrara was unquestionable. But triumph for one often meant danger for another. In this case, the silent rival watching from the shadows was Isabella d'Este, Alfonso's sister-in-law and one of the most influential women of the Renaissance. Isabella had long ruled Ferrara's court life with elegance and dominance. Her wit and presence are unmatched. Yet, Lucrezia's arrival threatened that supremacy. The Chancellor Isabella had placed as a spy in the bridal chamber delivered her the details she craved. But the report was not what she hoped. Instead of failure, she was forced to confront Lucrezia's success. Rather than collapsing under pressure, the Borgia bride had turned the night into a triumph. For Isabella, this was humiliation. The game of power in Ferrara's court had changed, and a new rival had emerged. Whispers soon turned into a silent war. Lucrezia and Isabella fought not with armies, but with influence. Every gesture at court became loaded with meaning. A glance, a word, or a smile could shift alliances. The two women wove webs of loyalty and rivalry, turning Ferrara's palace into a battlefield of psychology and subtlety. For Isabella, it was a bitter struggle to maintain her dominance. For Lucrezia, it was survival refined into strategy. Beyond Ferrara, the marriage altered Italy's fragile balance. The Este Borgia alliance created a new axis of power that neither France, Spain, nor rival duchies could ignore. Treaties were redrawn, alliances reconsidered, and enemies silenced. The Boers had embedded themselves into Ferrara's destiny, and the Estes had secured the most powerful bride in Europe. Yet the scandal of that night never faded. Even as politics stabilized, the whispers continued. 3 times in one night, witnessed, recorded, sanctified, what should have been private became legendary. The act of consummation had been transformed into a public spectacle, and the scandal ensured that Lucrezia Borgia's name would echo through history. But this was only the beginning. What awaited in the years to come, tragedy, betrayal, and affairs, would prove that Lucrezia was not merely a survivor. She was a strategist, a woman capable of turning the very weapons used against her into instruments of power. The wedding night was not an ending. It was the foundation of an empire built on scandal. The night of February 2nd, 1502 was more than a scandal. It was the beginning of a transformation. For centuries, chroniclers obsessed over the details, the candles, the crimson curtains, and the whispered confirmations that the act had been consummated 3 times in one night. But the true legacy of that ritual was not the gossip it created. It was the power it gave to Lucrezia Borgia. From that moment onward, she was no longer a pawn of papal intrigue. She was a survivor who had learned to turn scandal into strength. Within Ferrara, her position became unshakable. Each pregnancy, each child she bore, was living proof that the marriage had been legitimized beyond question. The dynasty's survival depended on her survival. And in Renaissance Italy, that made her untouchable. Yet power is never without rivals. The greatest of these was Isabella d'Este, the elegant and ruthless star of court life. For Isabella, Lucrezia's triumph was an insult that could not be ignored. Their rivalry would ignite a subtle but vicious war for influence that haunted Ferrara for decades. Lucrezia, however, had mastered a new form of survival: sexual diplomacy. Her most daring move came when she entered into a secret affair with Francesco Gonzaga, Isabella's own husband. It was a decision that blended passion with strategy. To outsiders, it was betrayal. To Lucrezia, it was protection, a way to secure another line of power against her enemies. Letters discovered centuries later reveal both tenderness and calculation, proving that Lucrezia knew how to balance desire with survival. Her ability to weave networks of loyalty through intimacy was revolutionary. Where most women of her time were broken by circumstance, Lucrezia thrived. She turned every weakness into a weapon, every scandal into a shield. She showed that in a world dominated by men, a woman could bend the rules of power by mastering the only battlefield left to her: the marriage bed and the court of influence. The impact of her scandalous wedding night reached far beyond Ferrara. Other noble houses began to imitate the protocol. Multiple consummations witnessed and recorded became the standard to prevent enrollments and silence rivals. The bedroom was no longer private. It was political. What Lucrezia and Alfonso enacted in their chamber became a template for dynastic survival. In her later years, Lucrezia evolved from a scandalous bride into a respected duchess. She ruled Ferrara with dignity, balancing motherhood, governance, and her hidden strategies. To many, she remained a figure of suspicion, forever tied to the Borgia name. Yet to others, she was a symbol of resilience, a woman who refused to be destroyed by the very system designed to use her. Her story is not a fairy tale. It is a warning, a revelation of how sex, power, and politics intertwined in the Renaissance. It shows us that scandal was not weakness, it was survival, and survival could become dominance. So when we remember the night Lucrezia Borgia consummated her marriage 3 times in one night, we are not just recalling a scandal. We are witnessing the moment a pawn became a queen, a survivor became a strategist, and a bride became a legend. If this glimpse into history's forbidden chambers unsettled you, imagine the secrets still hidden in Europe's archives. Give this video a like if you want us to keep unearthing the scandalous protocols that reshaped empires. In the comments, tell us which queen, duchess, or courtesan you want us to expose next. The name most mentioned will star in our next investigation. And do not forget to subscribe and ring the bell because these truths are only revealed to those who dare. Join our Brotherhood of Hidden.